I was imagining like there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the news, and I I like thinking about how that would play out in an ideal kind of world.
Hmm.
And so that's always something that's I guess I'm interested in talking about that. So I imagine people would find it interesting to hear. Like if there's a well, that the obvious one right now is coronavirus. How would an epidemic play out in an ideal world of our imagination, where we have the kind of government structures that are able to handle that sort of stuff, the gift economy. How would all of that affect the situation? How would it look different? I think that would be interesting. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How do you think it would look different as far as like a pandemic?
Pandemic. One thing I was thinking about, I was thinking like there's a bill going around, I think, where landlords can't evict people for not paying rent for 4 months or something like that in the US.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking like, what if a bunch of people stop paying rent? There's already a huge percentage of the population in cities like New York, for example, who can't afford rent this month. But that also means landlords are losing money because they're not collecting it. And I don't know how big of a cash buffer landlords have. I imagine at least a few of them aren't that rich, and that's their main income source, and they only have a couple properties, and so if they lose that income, it might dig into their finances as well. So I'm thinking, what if landlords forgave rent or just accepted that they wouldn't receive it because people aren't able to pay it? And then what if utility companies said, "Oh well, all these landlords can't afford to pay our bills, and or the renters or whoever." What if they said, "Okay, we'll accept that and just forgive it and leave their water and electricity on even though they're not paying?" And what if that had like a ripple effect throughout the entire economy where everybody just realizes, all right, if everybody realized at the same time that they weren't going to get paid for what they're doing because the economy sucks and nobody has any money, and they forgave all of the debts and continued just doing what they're already doing, just doing business as usual to the extent that they can. Wouldn't that work? Because technically we have all the resources, right? It's just the money that's missing.
Yeah. I think that it would work for a little bit, but what would be the one thing that goes into my head is then like how does mobility work? So when you want to move, if I'm a renter and I want to move into another house, then if there's no longer any money, then how can I move into another house? Like what is the process then to kind of to be mobile? You know what I mean? What's the process then to get out of a smaller apartment and move into a bigger place?
Well, I realize this is like a extremely fantastical situation. It's very unrealistic for a lot of reasons. But the idea would be we can just switch just like that to a gift economy. We just stop using money.
Yeah.
There's nothing really stopping us because we have
That's
everything. We have all the means to produce food. We have all the housing we need. There's like empty apartments, empty houses, and homeless people in the streets.
exactly. I totally agree with that because I mean there's like what 5 homes to every homeless person, or and a ridiculous amount of more homes than there are homeless people. I guess my question's more of what would be the process in your head, like if you were running this thing and you had a say in it, what would you say would be like the process that makes sense for some like finding a new place in the gift economy? What would that look like?
Oh, okay. So you're saying like within, if a gift economy is already established, what would that look like?
Yeah, yeah.
Gotcha. Oh man, these are such interesting questions. Part of me wants to just like sit down and think through it, but since we're in a conversation, I'll just say whatever comes to mind, I guess. So if somebody's living in a small place, they want to move it to a bigger place. Well, if there's bigger places available, then it's not really a problem. They just go to the people responsible for coordinating and organizing resources, in this case, housing resources, and they make a request. Because instead of buying things, you just make requests, basically.
Yeah.
And then if the request is able to be fulfilled, they'll fulfill it.
And I think that's really natural because, one, now you have this whole new department, which is a job in itself of resource management, right? So they know like where the bigger spaces are, how much bigger spaces there are. And if you have a bunch of people who are saying, this place isn't right for me, you know, and not on a like, oh, I just want to be like greedy kind of thing, but like actually like I'm living in a 2-bedroom apartment and I have, 3 kids, like it's just too small, like logistically speaking. And they go to resource management, they put in their request, and there aren't enough bigger homes. Well, then that lets us know that we need to build some more,
Yes,
which
exactly.
which has to happen. And then now everybody's just putting in their. Now, I would say in a gift economy as well, though, I would say there needs to be like some type of standard of the amount if you're able to work. If you're even if you I mean maybe it's up to a certain age, or but even if you had like a disability, there's jobs that like people with disabilities can do. I would say that there needs to be some type of a
Like
standard
a
as far as.
requirement.
Yeah, that because we need everyone needs to kind of put their work in for it to work, and there's plenty of
Yeah.
jobs and things to be done. But I do think like the work week doesn't have to necessarily be so long.
I don't think everyone has to work.
No, you don't
I
think
think
so?
a certain number of people have to work. Not everyone.
Well, what do you think would then distinguish that? Because I would
Yeah,
feel
that's
like
a good
it
question.
needs to be age, because I would be kind of mad, and I think there might be some people that would feel like, oh well, I mean maybe like 20 to 40 you have to work,
I can think
and
of a
if you're
couple.
not that, then you cannot. Then you don't have to.
I can think of a couple of angles to think about this from. One is that I don't think it's necessarily true that people would need to be coerced to work. I think purely with volunteers, it's possible for everything that needs to get done. But the other angle, which I guess ties into this one too, is the important thing isn't really what are the requirements, but what are the consequences for breaking them. Like, what are we going to do to people who don't work when we want them to? Because that's going to determine what kind of society we live in. If we punish them with I don't know, fines or jail time, or well, any kind of punishment, even social ostracization. I can't think of the word. Even if we like outcast them socially, that's a form of punishment. On the other hand, what if instead of punishing them, we ask what's stopping them from working? What if that's the consequence? Right?
Yeah, that's the first thing that popped in my head. It's asking like why and finding out why that's the case.
Yeah, that's going to be a
Especially
very different society because people aren't going to be afraid of punishment. They're not going to work because bad things are going to happen to me if I don't. That's not a very motivating reason to go to work. That's like a carrot and stick mentality, except maybe a little backwards, like cattle prod mentality. And like there's studies showing people don't do their best work with extrinsic motivation. They do their best work with intrinsic motivation, like that they want to do it.
yeah.
If you take a group of people doing some creative job and you say, and they're happy doing it, and they're doing it really well. And you go in and say, "Oh, you guys are doing so well. I'm going to give you this amount of money for every job that you accomplish this way." The natural tendency for those people is to suddenly stop putting all their creativity in because they realize they can get money from it, and start doing the absolute minimum effort needed to meet that requirement. It's like an unconscious thing. They don't even actively choose to do it, but like the moment you know you're being either rewarded or punished for doing something, it stops being something you want to do, something you're doing for fun, something you're applying your whole mind to, and starts being something that's just a chore or a task or work. It's a different energy. Now, of course, there's plenty of people who can make money and still enjoy it and be passionate about it. They probably don't do it for the money, though. That's the thing. They have it sorted out in their minds where they're doing it because they're happy and the money is a side effect. So yeah, and anytime there's requirements of any kind or laws or anything, the question is what's going to happen if people violate them. If we use cattle prods and carrots, that's gonna stop people from putting all their passion and love into giving back to their society, their community.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is why I think that as far as like, let's say taking this into the real world, that's why I think like starting small is better, because when you start small, it's like you're asking people to opt into something. You know, you're not forcing it on them. Oh, now this is like a big change, and we're gonna, you know, this is something that people like opt into. And I think that like choosing to be a part of something where you know that these are kind of, this is what, if we do it this way, this is how it works. And I think that choosing to be a part of that is a big part of what you're talking about, you know,
Yeah,
then
I agree
being
completely.
intrinsically like pushed to do it. You know, the one thing that I do think about though is that, you know, sometimes that thing that you thought you liked kind of wears off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't like to like clean our rooms or wash dishes or take out the trash. Like there's certain things
Yeah,
that
that's a good point.
we don't like to do, but that we have to do. And I do think that that's kind of necessary, because I don't want to like, you know, I don't want to like be, you know, blinded or naive to the fact that there's things that are going to be hard or monotonous or tedious, and we're going to have to do it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, yeah.
I think that's definitely worth talking about some more. And like I said, what if we approach when somebody doesn't want to do something? What if we ask them what's stopping you? And I think that's worth talking about some more too.
Yeah.
I I like the idea from the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. He points out that on a fundamental level, there's nothing we have to do. There's nothing we absolutely must do and we don't have a choice about it. Because we always have a choice. It's just that sometimes the choice leads to consequences that we want to avoid. But it's still important to think of it as a choice. It's important to think of, like, if I don't go to work in this society, if I don't show up, my boss will fire me, right? That doesn't mean I have to go to work. I'm free to say, well, I accept the consequences of getting fired, and so I'm not going to show up today. That's an option that we have. And whenever we say we have to do something, we're denying our responsibility for our choices. Because there are cases where that's a good option. There are cases where people quit their jobs and were much happier because of it, right? So
Yeah.
if they had the mentality of, oh, I have to do this, that's like shutting down part of their brain that could be thinking of more creative ways to address whatever the situation is. And it's also a justification for violence. Like Marshall Rosenberg points out that that's exactly the kind of thinking the Nazis used in the Holocaust. A lot of people working in that movement said, oh, I was just doing my job. I had to do it. there'd be consequence for me if I didn't. So I had to do it. And they're probably right. There would have been consequences for them. But it's still a different thing to say, well, okay, I knew it was wrong and I chose to do it because I knew there would be consequences. When you put it like that, instead of saying I have to do it, when you say I chose to do it, you're taking the responsibility for your actions. And that makes you think in a different way. That makes you think in a way that's a lot more in touch with your inner feelings. And anyway, I think I'm getting on a bit of a tangent. What were we talking about?
No, I think that's great. I think the more, you know, that you're choosing it and taking responsibility of your choices, that is better. I think when you do start thinking about this is what I have to do, it does stresses you out. It stresses you out a little bit more. That's for sure. And yeah, I like that thought of how that does like then kind of make violence okay, because these were things that you had to do and you
Yeah.
didn't do them. So this is why you had this consequence.
Yeah, it can be as simple as I don't know, a spouse coming home and saying, "Oh, I had to work all day, therefore I demand this and this,"
Yeah.
because or they're just in a bad mood, because it can be as simple as being in a bad mood because you think you're not in control of your life.
Yeah.
Or it can be as violent as anything.
My question, well, not question, well, I mean, maybe a question, but thought is still like where I'm not all the way. And I mean, of course, this is kind of a new thought process. You know, we grow up in a world where these are responsibilities and you have to do this or you're not going to have, you know, a roof over your head, or you have to do this way, or, you know, things are going to happen or things are going to fall apart. And I don't know. I think that there is a balance to be found because, of course, everything that we're doing, we're making a choice. And I don't think the have tos should kind of ever contradict or dismantle certain principles, such as like nonviolence or, you know, honesty, just being good, a good person and good to other people.
Yeah.
But like I said, I don't know if it's so black and white. I don't know if I'm sold on it because they're like going back to the kind of thing of, well, what about the things that people aren't going to want to do, or what
Yeah.
about, you know, like it's not going to be all cushy and great and everybody's on their best behavior all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes,
There's going to be
yeah,
conflicts, and sometimes people aren't going to want to do things that have serious consequences. So how do you deal with those situations? And yeah, I wanted to address that. I just in my head, there's so many aspects to this. I got caught up focusing on one of them. So yeah, I'm glad you brought me back to that point. So with that principle in mind of we're all responsible for our actions and everything we do is a choice. We have the option to refuse to do something. Is there a way to apply that principle in these situations where there's something important needs to be done, or else there'll be serious consequences, and there's not enough people to do it? What do we do? How do we deal with that?
my if I could oh, did you have a thought or am I interrupting?
Yes, I'm just taking a moment to think through it, but you can go ahead.
Well, one of my thoughts, because just in like writing the book of the idea or kind of like thinking about those things in like the community, I was like thinking, well, some of the stuff that people don't want to do or that I don't want to do are kind of like tedious things, right? So what if we created, you know, technology that did that stuff for us?
Yeah,
You know what I
exactly,
mean?
exactly.
You know, we could put our creativity and our manpower into that, you know, instead of things that might be already efficient enough, or you know, I don't, yeah, basically like creating technology to do those things for us.
Yeah, automate it.
Kind of.
If it's
Yeah,
tedious, automate
exactly.
it.
Exactly.
That's one of the solutions I want to talk about, yeah, or to bring up. there's a number of ways to approach it. That's one of them. If there's a tedious job, you can automate it. There's other strategies as well. Like, we can make it a group activity. The Yukwana tribe in South America, they would, when they're raising a house or roofing or doing some tedious work, they'd make a party out of it. They'd gather a bunch of people from the village and all come work on it together, and they take turns doing the tedious activity. And while they're there, they're chatting, hanging out, socializing. It could be a party. You can have food and drinks, like a work party.
Yeah.
That's another strategy.
Yeah.
There's more. We can figure out how to avoid the job entirely. Like, why is the task necessary in the first place? Maybe we can change something else about how we live in order to make that job unnecessary. For example, maybe the job nobody wants to do is working in the sewer, unclogging pipes for the city that are full of sewage. One thing we could do is have composting toilets, and then we create less sewage, and then we need less people working in the sewer in order to deal with it.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Have you seen that documentary with Bill Gates?
No, I haven't.
Oh my gosh, it's on Netflix. You should watch it. He created, or he helped to fund the search, or I don't even know what you call it, contest or something, to create an all-in-one process toilet that basically was
wow.
solar power, powered itself, took the waste and fueled it, would take your waste and that would fuel the toilet, I think, and then the only thing that would come out of the toilet is basically compost. And they also created this sanitation water treatment machine thing that basically took all the poop. It would take poop and waste and process it, and the things that would come out are clean were two things: clean water, completely clean water that you saw Bill Gates just take and drink himself, and compost, for fertilizer.
That is awesome.
Yeah,
definitely we can do so much with technology.
Yeah, technology is definitely our friend.
I imagine that's for countries that don't have clean water.
Yeah, it was for exactly.
Oh,
and
man.
Their clean water situation is just from a lack of sewage, a lack of sanitation as far as what to do with human the waste.
Right.
But yeah, it's very good. It's on Netflix, because that's not the only thing. That's one part. There's so many different. I didn't know a lot about nuclear power until I watched that documentary, and he talks about nuclear power, a couple of other things too. Of course, it goes into his life, but it's him trying to solve world problems.
Oh, okay.
Him and his wife.
I might have to watch that.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I know there's a lot of things that can be done even with simple technology. For example, we had a huge breakthrough in clean water when people in some countries just started digging 5-foot deep holes to poop in for outhouses, right? Because before they wouldn't do that, and the problem is there's a lot of diseases that are parasites that can crawl 5 feet through the ground and infect somebody.
Yeah.
So if you dig a hole just deep enough that they can't reach the surface, you're suddenly a lot more hygienic and sanitary. So I believe both in high technology and low technology. I think there's a ton we can do with low technology that we aren't making good use of.
Oh, for sure. I think that kind of circles back to permaculture.
Exactly. Yeah.
You don't really need a lot of technology for that. It's just, like I said, I think everything is a balance. It's not too extreme in one way and too extreme in the other. It's it should be a balance of things,
I usually think of it as a mix rather than a balance.
Yeah.
Because the two extremes both have something important to them. It's not about finding the one point in the middle. It's about using each of the extremes where it's appropriate, and not getting stuck in one frame of mind. When the
Yeah,
situation
that's a good
changes,
point.
you change which tool you apply.
That's a good point.
But do we address the what to do if there's not enough people working question? I think there's more to say about that.
Oh yeah. I mean, honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind is that like I feel like there's always going to be enough people. There should be, right? An abundance
Mm-hmm.
of people. But also what also comes to my mind is that
Oh, I remember. Go ahead.
I think everyone has a passion for something and it's about uncovering that
Yeah,
passion. And
exactly.
I think some people who are disconnected just they might not know what their passion is. And I think it shouldn't be like, oh, sit down here and take this, career test or whatever. It should be like a really immersive, type of experience. I think that this is where I think video games are really underutilized in our society and they could be serving so much more of
In what
our
way?
well okay, so this is one way. I remember I had this conversation with a friend shortly before this whole corona virus stuff started blowing up, and it's like the last time I actually was at a bar having drinks with friends.
Mm-hmm.
But in that conversation he was telling me like when he was in film school, we like got grouped up. I went to USC film school, and like there's a semester where you get randomly assigned with two other people, and you have to make movies together. And
Oh well.
his, yeah, his, and usually it's a lot of drama, but in his group, he didn't have any drama, and
Man, group work in school is challenging.
yeah, oh yeah, for sure. And so he was telling me that because he is of Jewish, like he's Jewish, and like his granddad was like almost like put in a concentration camp, but like a friend of his who was German, whose like life he saved at some point, basically intervened and saved his life.
Wait, he
And
did what?
his like granddad or great granddad, he was gonna go to a concentration camp, but
Right.
his like friend, his German friend, whose life he saved at some point, I think is how the story went.
Oh, wow.
He like basically like tipped him off, like, hey, they're coming to your neighborhood next, like you
Oh,
need to
okay.
leave. Like get
Jeez.
your family and go.
That's
And
crazy.
so yeah. So circling back to like film school, like he was in a group with a guy who was German, who after some conversation he basically found out like that his family was probably like, on the other side of the war, but not that, but he didn't let that like, make him have any type of drama or whatever. Like that's kind of what the whole point of it was. And I was like, oh my goodness, in the midst of him telling his story about his family, about his great granddad and his that experience of escaping like the Holocaust, I was like, wow, like that would be like a good experience for someone who is like tends toward discrimination or has like hateful thoughts toward other races. That would be a good experience for them to go through and experience and come out on the other side feeling like, you know, a need for like unity. And I was like, you know what? The only thing that I know that could like really create that experience for someone is like some type of like fully immersed like video game, like virtual reality, to the point where it feels like kind of like real for them, that they're making these choices, that they're going through this story, and in the midst of this like story and this experience and this gameplay, like they're fundamentally like becoming a more empathetic person. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I'm like, I feel
So
like
wait, so by this experience you mean the experience of getting exposed to? Do you mean the experience his grandpa had, or
well,
the
yeah, I mean,
experience he had meeting the German guy?
it could be that. It could be any storyline, really, or any world kind of crafted for that specific person. You know what I mean? But yeah, but like going through like a life experience of, oh, wow, I'm in need. And this other person who is of, a culture or something that I don't understand or or may have been mean to or hateful towards or violent towards. Now in the in this, gameplay virtual reality kind of thing storyline, this person is now like saving me at my like darkest time or something. I don't know what the story would
I
be,
see.
but like to go through something like that and to come out on the other side like kind of like rehabilitated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I feel like video games have a very they could be used to for rehabilitation,
So
really, in a positive
you've
way.
seen people have these sorts of life experiences that fundamentally change their way of thinking,
Exactly.
and you're
And I
thinking how to recreate that, how to let people experience that
exactly.
without necessarily having a direct way to do that. Because there's a lot of people living in like isolated communities, maybe a small town in the middle of nowhere where it's all the same kind of people, it's all the same kind of mindset. They don't have a lot of variety. I a couple of thoughts come to mind. One is that's like a story, right? I like the aspect of it that's a story presenting a story. I think that's very underutilized because a lot of stories are about drama and conflict in our media, not just games, but like fiction, books, movies. And we can use that in that way for sure to show people new ways of thinking and being. And they don't have to experience it directly, even. They can project themselves onto the characters. That's why stories are so effective at teaching. That's why we've
Yeah.
been telling them since cave times or whatever, Stone Age. My other thought is, though, specifically with the game, there's a certain I'm worried that it frames things in a way where it's less authentic because you know it's a game when you're playing it. I mean, I love games. I play a lot of games. The main thing I get out of games is getting to practice skills that would be difficult to practice in real life because games can put me in situations that are hard to create in real life and still require the exact same kind of thinking or a very similar kind of thinking. No,
Yeah.
not all games do that. That's why I like fairly unique games. But I think all of them have like teach you skills of some kind. But yeah, the part of what's so good about experiencing it in real life is that it's real people and it's real consequences for your life. And that gives you a different mindset because I have a little bit of game development experience, as you know.
Yeah.
Players, very, very often, one of the first things someone does when they play a game is try to break it, try to test its limits, try to be as much of a jerk as possible, you know? And it's because they know it's not real. You can't fool somebody. You can't say, oh, have this experience and pretend it's real, or like, you can't pretend that it's a meaningful moral choice when it is a fictional world on a screen. The strength of video games is letting people experiment though. So I think one thing that they really would be good at is like letting people find out what happens, what the consequences are of trying to break the system or of being a jerk in certain situations, like in maybe in a gift economy or in restorative justice. You can make a simulation that when you act like a jerk in a game, the fictional characters in the game will respond in a certain way, and you get to see how that works, how that operates. A lot of people do, like when I talk to them about, say, nonviolent communication, one of the first things most people I talk to ask is, well, what about the psychopaths, or what about the people who don't care about the rules? What about the people who, quote unquote, are jerks? And I put that in quotes because it's a judgment. It's nonviolent communication teaches us to prefer describing people's behaviors instead of attributing characteristics to the people themselves. Like nobody's a jerk, but they might have behaviors that hurt others. That'd be a more accurate way to put it. Just because someone does something doesn't mean they are something. Right? But yeah, people ask that, and like, it's a good question. Everybody wants to know how do you deal with people behaving in a way that we don't like or that hurts others? How do you deal with that without punishing them without causing more violence by, getting revenge on them or putting them in jail or something. That'd be cool to explore in a game, I think.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Although I still worry a little bit because also the nonviolent communication is a process that really, really engages human creativity. Because once you know each other's needs, then you can come up with a million different ways to resolve the conflict.
Yeah.
But that requires like having the creativity to see, okay, what actual options do we have? And I think that
Yeah.
can be simulated to some extent, but you can never fully simulate like the presence of a human.
Of course, I think that all of it requires a human, conversation. I think that a therapist is really, really important. I think mental health is in that way. Actually talking to someone, especially someone who has been given the skills or trained in having those types of conversations with people and counseling in that way, I think is really important. I do also think that, yeah, there's potential in a game or a program and like identifying things, and maybe some people might even respond more to that. Um, but also some people might not. Some people might respond more to therapy. There's also probably a million other ways that we can put our minds together and come up with, and other people will have come up with and maybe have already come up with that I just have never even heard of or read about
Oh
yet.
yeah,
So
I
I'm
like the
sure there's
idea
like
of exposure
so many
too.
options.
Like exposure is what I call. Like, I've looked at studies of overcoming racism. There was one study that actually looked at rats of different colors, like their fur. They had two kinds of rats, ones with black fur and ones with white fur, and they did some experiments on them. They found that whichever color the rats grew up with, when they were presented with a rat of that color who was in distress, like stuck in a cage that they could press a button to free, they would help that rat out. But if it was a different color that they're not familiar with, they wouldn't help that rat out.
Oh.
So racism in rats, right? They only help the kind of rat they're familiar with. But it's funny because it even extends to if you raise a white rat or a black rat, but they're completely surrounded by rats of the opposite color or the other color. um, they will like they won't help their own color because they're not familiar with them.
Hmm.
Which shows that, well, it went further. I mean, there's a YouTube video about this. I should probably just link it somewhere. But they went further and then exposed those rats to a mix of rats. And once they gained that new familiarity with the opposite color that they didn't have before, they started helping them. So the way they overcame racism is through exposure, through talking to those people. And I think we see that in humans as well. There's one guy, oh man, what was his name? Daryl Davis, I think.
Oh yeah, I saw that
Yeah, yeah.
documentary.
He's a black person, talked to members of the Ku Klux Klan, and converted a lot of them away from it. Just by talking to them on like, he wasn't even trying to convert them. He just wanted to, he approached them with curiosity and said, hey, why do you have these beliefs that, you don't like me because I'm this color skin? He asked them that and had like reasonable conversations with them. And through just that simple exposure where they were talking in a non-hostile way as two humans, through that exposure they realized, okay, wow, all these ideas I had of people with this skin color aren't really accurate because now I'm talking to one and he seems like a really nice guy and I like him. So maybe my whole belief system here isn't really true reality anymore. So yeah, I think if there's those kinds of groupthink prejudices between people, exposure might be a great solution.
Yeah, I know that there's like I read somewhere, and I would have to read it again to specifically know what it was, but there's like a place where like there's a 0% murder rate, and
Oh wow.
some justice system somewhere, I don't think it's from the United States, uh like sends murderers like or violent offenders to this place where there's a 0% murder rate, just so that they can like basically be rehabilitated or
Oh
reformed.
wow.
Yeah, I have to look it up because I don't know any specifics. I just remembered like that was the gist of the article, which is pretty cool.
That does remind me of like prisons in, I think it was Norway, where the prisons are, they're still prisons, but they are built to look as much like a community as possible, with the mindset of, let's put these people who have trouble operating in a community into an environment where they can learn how to do it.
Exactly. Which makes so much sense, right?
Yeah.
Not like in cages like animals.
Exactly.
You know? Even animals
In
shouldn't
cages,
be in cages.
in cages with other criminals with whom they can discuss better methods of committing crime.
Exactly. And where people who are non-violent offenders go into and become violent because they're around, because of the culture
Yeah.
and of the prison. It's just so backwards, but that's so rooted in so many problems that the only way to look is forward to solve those problems that people are
I think it
well
starts
aware.
with understanding like the base principles of why exactly that's a problem. Like nonviolent communication. I think that's key to a lot of things. And just in case, somebody's listening not familiar with nonviolent communication, um, the title is a bit misleading. It doesn't mean nonviolence in the sense you'd think. It doesn't mean like pacifism. It actually means, it defines violence as thoughts or words or actions that lead to harm. And it does, NVC, nonviolent communication, does condone protective use of force. I'm not an expert in it, so don't like, my disclaimer is I may not be explaining it perfectly, although I really believe in it and like it and do my best to share it. What was I saying? Sorry, I'm spacing out a bit. So basically, it's kind of tricky to explain, actually.
Just read the book.
Yeah.
No.
But it doesn't mean what people think it means. It's not about letting people walk all over you. You still take action to make sure to protect yourself, to make sure your needs are met. You just do it in a way that minimizes the harm to other people. That's what nonviolence means in this context. And
Exactly. I could see why that needs to be clarified, because I actually wasn't even thinking in that way of, well, if you're nonviolent, then, that means that you're weak or you're going to let people do whatever you want. I don't feel that you need violence to assert yourself.
the thing about nonviolent communication is it's nonviolent not only in how you express yourself, but how you hear and receive from others. So when others try to do violence to you or speak in a violent way, you redirect that and identify the sort of nonviolent expression behind it, of what their feelings and needs are behind that action. And you redirect the focus to that so that you actually hopefully stop the violence by empathizing with the person. So it's actually like also a way of protecting yourself from violence. Because if you just fight off violence with more violence, or with just putting up a stone wall and trying to shield yourself, that's not gonna, like, if someone's doing violence, they have a reason for it. It might not be a very good reason, but they have like feelings and needs behind that. Maybe they think their safety is threatened. Maybe they think you're hurting others and they're trying to stop you from hurting others. It could be any of a number of needs. So if you don't address the needs, then they're going to keep doing their strategy. So nonviolent communication is also a way of protecting yourself by recognizing why people are doing things they do and helping them find different ways to accomplish that are, safer for you, safer for others.
Yeah, I like that. This was great.
Yeah, I like this one a lot more. I think we'll be uploading this one. I'm not sure
For
about the first
sure.
one. I was really nervous and kind of just not in a good headspace, but I feel really good now.
Yeah, let's keep doing it. Like, they're just gonna get better and better. So
Absolutely.
Hey, I need to read that book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna read it this week.
All right.
All
Awesome.
right. Good night.
I'm really happy. So yeah. Good
Good.
night.
I'm glad. All right. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.